This is a hilarious thing coming from Hasbro, who want the classic Transformers games to be put on Game Pass once the Activision acquisition is complete, the Microsoft Activision acquisition, which has been approved over in America but hasn't been approved in the UK just yet. It's apparently going to go through in August. It got pushed back, but various territories have already signed off on it. It's definitely happening. And Hasbro stepped in there. Now, Hasbro representative highlighted the fact that a very good addition to Game Pass would be all the classic Transformers games. I remember the one that was on PS2. I know a lot of people love different ones or whatever, and it was always licensing that got in the way, or at least that's what we thought. Hasbro themselves have said, sadly, Activision's not sure what hard drives they're on in their building. When a company eats a company that eats a company, things get lost, and that's very frustrating. Hope is now that the deal is moving forward with Microsoft and Xbox that they'll be able to go through all of the archives and find every hard drive to find it all, because it's an easy Game Pass ad. We want those games back up for people that, to have a chance to play. This actually isn't as alien as you think. No. It's funny because I remember when Square lost Final Fantasy VIII for about 10 years. Everyone was, because they remastered 7 and 9 and 10 and 12. And then everyone was like, where's 8? And they were like, we don't know. It's somewhere. It's definitely somewhere. And then they eventually found, or they used I think they had to rely on a fan mod, and they brought that in and remastered that or something. There was some stupid gubbins that they actually just lost their own game.
If you're ever interested in the state of video game preservation, just look at that quote, and that kind of sums up just how ramshackle everything it is, where it's like you have a bunch of these games, and they're on a hard drive somewhere in a building that might get shut down when it gets acquired by another conglomerate.
The fact that someone could just pick up all the Transformers games, where have you put that, like a set of keys? Where have you put that? I don't know. Just put them down. Put the Transformers IP down somewhere.
Have you checked beneath the couch? Come on, please.
Next to the Switch. Go on.
Yeah.
It'll be where you left it.
It's funny because it reminds me of, there was a story doing the rounds recently when there was, I think, a reshuffle and people got fired from, I want to say, Pixar, where they were talking about how I think they sacked a woman who was in charge of saving Toy Story 2, because that was a similar situation where they lost the hard drive with it on, and she was like the only employee.
And that was her one job.
She was very high up in the company, but she just so happened to be the one employee, I think, who kind of had a backup version of it. It was like, thank God we have
just
this
a dongle
backup.
on a set of keys.
Yeah. Otherwise, we've lost all of that work. It's just, digital production like this is absolutely crazy. You know, when we talked about video game preservation a few weeks ago, I omitted the fact that, to me, video games as an industry right now remind me of the early days of film. Like, we talk about how well preserved a lot of movies are today. It's not perfect by any means, but, you know, they have systems in place to make sure a lot of this stuff is maintained well and it's kept so future generations can experience it. But in the early days of film, it was the Wild West, you know? Reels were going up in fires, reels were getting left all over the place. And as a result, there are so many movies from the dawn of cinema as an industry that we just know nothing about, because we have maybe a few still images. If we're lucky, we might have a bunch of damaged film from the production, but nothing, because so many of them were just mistreated and mishandled. And that reminds me of the era that we're in with games now, where it's a huge industry, people are loving it, but it doesn't have that kind of maybe respect, or certainly not the infrastructure to maintain all of this stuff as it should be. And hopefully we get to that point, but I worry that it will repeat the mistakes of film, where it does get to that point, but it means anything in its formative years for the first few decades is hit or miss. It's most of it's lost, most of it's damaged, most of it is inaccessible.
I think there's such an assumption as well that these things don't exist in physical space, that they exist on a cloud or a server in general, like some sort of impenetrable, it's under lock and key, the history of gaming is right there and no one will ever delete it. The fact that you could just delete these entire games, that they do have a physical space and files on a hard drive and whatever. I think that, like I said, there are other cases of it. The one that comes to mind is the Final Fantasy one, but I know there's been other cases of that in gaming history, just having games on USBs and hard drives and everything. But yeah, this whole thing, Hasbro themselves obviously wanting to, I think the most recent Transformers movie was a bit of a bomb, so it's the Transformers IPs in a little bit of a lull, and it's you might as well make them available. There's a whole nostalgic part of that would do extremely well. For me, I just want Raven back. I just want Raven freed from the COD cages to do something new again. And if you're going to go through the archives, for the love of Jesus himself, put Singularity on Game Pass.
Yes.
It's just one of the best games that, Alpha Protocol's not them, but Alpha Protocol is more buggy, but that game was ambitious AF. Just put those classics on there.
This is it. Transformers isn't necessarily my franchise. I know there are a bunch of games in that series that people really, really loved. I think a lot of them that were made by High Moon Studios.
Yeah.
But to me, Hasbro is right in that not only should they get Transformers back on the service, they should get all of those licensed games back on the service. Give us Spider-Man, give us all of those Marvel games. Like, if you're going to make a deal of this magnitude, renew those licenses, go back to those contracts, get those games that people have a lot of nostalgia for, people have a lot of love for, and whack them on Game Pass. Because not only is it good for video game preservation, it's good because those games are good. And I want to be able to talk about them and not have to point people towards the direction of like a £40 secondhand copy.
But the thing is, like, there's a few different ways that people are approaching this. Like, I've seen a few people have got in touch with me and recommended Antstream Arcade, which, like, Antstream is a website or a service that, like, catalogs old school games that you can stream. And Antstream Arcade or Antstream Anthology, whatever it's called, on Xbox, and it's only on Xbox, does have Mortal Kombat 1 and all these, like, an Earthworm Jim and all these, like, old games on there, but they're not downloaded, they're streamed. And so that put me off because I need the responsiveness, especially in 2D games, because I need it to be a lot more responsive. And so I wasn't that bothered about that, but that's one way to do it. And when you look at the list of games that Antstream have got, they include like licensed stuff like Earthworm Jim. So I'm like, okay, that kind of conversation must have happened unless the terms of that original contract were more about downloadable games as opposed to streaming. Maybe that's the loophole. I'm not sure. And so that's one thing. The other one is the approach, well, there's a few, but like there's the Konami's one where they're just putting the TMNT collection together or the Castlevania collection, and you can just, it's just like, it's a launcher with 6 games on it and you just go through them. Kind of like Nintendo's own Mario Trilogy thing from a few years ago that they then took off sale. But then, for me, the best way to do it is the Atari 51. You go back to the people who made it and you interview them and you talk about it and you celebrate that era. Right. Like, if you got people from Hasbro or some of the devs, High Moon, like, or Raven, or whoever it is, get them on board and have it as like this awesome fan package. That makes it way more recommendable. And there's enough, that's so easy to put together. Like, a lot of those people assumedly will still be easily reachable. I just think you might as well celebrate it. I cannot recommend the Atari 50 package enough. Like, it's such a great slab of gaming history. And it's half chatty face style documentary, half playable history. And it's like, why not do that? Like, why not walk that line? You have the access to it.
I want both. I want the originals, and I want a lovely packaged version like that with all the bells and whistles where we do celebrate them, where we do look at the people who actually made them. Because I think licensed games in particular are so just kind of discarded. Like, they were content before content was a thing, Like, they were given these ridiculous turnarounds to these developers who sometimes didn't have any experience, and they were just kind of told to, fart them out and essentially get these out in time for the movies. Even, I'm pretty sure, I can't remember who said this, but like, some movie executives being on the record, I think it might be when Marvel were making games, and it was kind of just viewed as an extension of the movie's marketing rather than its own piece of art or its own product. It was just there to promote the movie. But that said, just because they have that kind of context doesn't mean that the people who didn't work on them were passionate about the IP, were passionate about what they were making. And great games have managed to flourish under those difficult conditions. And I think those success stories, like you said, and even the ones that aren't success stories, are worth talking about, are worth championing it, are worth archiving in that way.
Some of my favorite little documentary type things are, like I said, in the Atari 50 thing, they massively just go in on how ludicrous the Jaguar was and why it failed, and talk about all the things they got wrong and why Atari died for all those years, all the ET stuff, etc. And then I also love Xbox's own, when they did their 20th anniversary documentary, it's on the official Xbox channel, they have a whole bit about how much they messed up the Xbox One and how they got everything wrong and whatever else. You can celebrate that stuff. Like, it's why not? And in Transformers' case or Hasbro's case, it would assumedly only lead to a better bolstering of the brand. If you want to go down the really cold PR marketing side of it, it would celebrate that brand. Like, it's just one of those things where I wish that side of preservation was done a lot more, like re-inject the human side of it. Like, these people did make these games. I would love the amount of stories you get out of people turning those things around. Like you said, someone making the Bugs Life game, they've got like 2 weeks or whatever. And it's like, what version of the film was available? What were you going off? What notes were you given? Like, those are all great stories.